The moment I heard that suitcase hit the floor upstairs, I knew my son was walking out on us. It wasn't just the sound of luggage. It was the sound of betrayal echoing through the same house where we once sang hymns on Sunday mornings. Every instinct in me screamed that something holy had just broken. I climbed those stairs with my heart pounding like a church drum, ready to face the truth no father ever wants to see. What I found in that room changed everything. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for the rest of this story. I took the stairs one slow step at a time, the wood moaning under my weight like it knew what was coming. That house had held 3 generations of our family. It had heard laughter gospel and the cries of newborns. But that night it was holding its breath. I could feel the walls listening. My hand brushed the banister my father carved back when this home was still a promise of stability, not the stage for heartbreak. The smell of lemon oil and old hymnals clung to the air, mixing with something sharp fear. My son's door was open just enough for the hallway light to slice across his floor. Inside his suitcase sat half-open shirt shoved in like he was burying evidence instead of packing for a trip. His laptop cast a cold blue glow over his face, and that face, the same one that used to beam with pride when he sang in the youth choir, looked hollow now. He didn't flinch when I stepped inside, didn't even look up. "You leaving?" I asked. My voice came out steady, but my heart was already unraveling. He muttered something about work, some emergency that didn't exist. My son worked at a repair shop, not NASA. He couldn't lie worth a damn, but the way he said it told me he'd already convinced himself it was necessary. I saw the reflection of his screen in the mirror, open, tabs, emails, bank records. Something was wrong, something deep. "Don't you lie to me in this house," I said quietly. I kept my tone calm the way I did with my students when I wanted the truth without the fight. "Where are you really going, son?" He paused just for a second, then zipped that bag so hard the sound sliced the air. "I'm leaving Pop. I need space." Space. The word hit harder than any curse could. "Your boy's downstairs," I reminded him. "You gonna tell him goodbye or just let him hear the car pulling away?" He didn't answer. He walked past me like I was a ghost. Like the years I spent raising him after his mama passed. Didn't matter. When he brushed against me, I smelled cheap cologne and something metallic. Sweat nerves. Guilt, maybe. I grabbed his arm. "Craig," I said, voice low but sharp. "Whatever this is, you don't have to run from it." He looked me dead in the eyes, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw the little boy I used to lift onto my shoulders at the Juneteenth parade. Then it was gone. "There's nothing left here for me," he said. Just like that. Cold. Final. He pulled away and stomped down the stairs, his suitcase thudding behind him like a drumbeat announcing surrender. I followed, my mind racing through every sermon I'd ever preached about forgiveness and grace. None of it made sense now. Mason was at the dining table, his head bent over his homework, the lamplight bouncing off his glasses. He looked up, saw the bag, and I swear the air left his lungs. "You going somewhere, Dad?" he asked. His voice was soft, careful, like he already knew the answer. Craig hesitated, his hand on the doorknob. "Just for a bit," he said. Mason didn't cry, didn't argue, just nodded, quiet and old for his age. That hurt worse than any tears could. When the door closed, the silence felt heavier than grief. I stood there, one hand on the back of my son's empty chair, staring at the spot where the light from the porch fell across the hardwood floor. "He's not coming back, is he?" Mason said. I swallowed hard. "No, son, I don't think he is." Mason nodded again, slow and sure, like he'd expected it all along. "It's okay, Grandpa," he said, his tone strange, steady, too steady. "I'll handle this." Later, when the house had gone quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock that had belonged to my daddy, I sat alone in my armchair. The faint sound of cars from the street drifted in, distant and careless. I tried to pray, but the words caught in my throat. How do you pray for a son who's betrayed you but is still the boy you once carried on your shoulders? I finally closed my eyes, asking for strength instead of answers. Around midnight, I heard something upstairs, the soft clatter of keys on a computer. It wasn't Craig this time. It was Mason. That boy should have been asleep. I climbed those stairs again, slower now, the air colder. When I reached his room, the glow from his laptop lit his face in blue and gold like candlelight on stained glass. He looked up at me, calm, composed. "Grandpa, I need you to see this." On his screen were bank accounts, loan papers, transfers with our names on them, but not our signatures. "He's been taking our money," Mason said, his voice trembling only at the edges. "All of it. Grandma's pension, my college fund, even Mom's memorial account. My legs almost gave out. My son had robbed us. Not just me, his own child." I sank into the chair by the bed, trying to breathe. "How do you know this?" I asked. Mason didn't blink. "Because I followed the trail. I've been watching him for weeks. I thought he was gambling or something. But it's worse." He showed me an email thread between Craig and a woman named Vanessa, a banker younger slick. They talked about new accounts, fake investments disappearing together. "He's leaving with her," Mason said. "And he used us to pay for it." The words cut like glass. I'd been a teacher for 30 years, raised boys who weren't mine, helped them find the right path when the world gave them none. But I couldn't save my own son from his own greed. Mason clicked through more files, each one proof of another betrayal. "I already filed fraud reports," he said matter-of-factly. "And I sent her employer everything she did. She'll lose her job by morning." He spoke with a quiet fury that scared me, not because it was violent, but because it was righteous. "You shouldn't have to do this," I told him. "You're a child." He shook his head. "Not anymore." I looked at him. Then really looked. This wasn't a boy. This was a young man carved from the fire of everything life had burned away. He'd been forced to grow up in a night. "What happens now?" I asked. Mason turned back to his screen. "Now we wait," he said. "Dad's accounts are frozen. The police will come for him soon. And when they do, I want him to understand exactly who stopped him. I left him there working like a detective from one of those crime shows he loved." When I finally crawled into bed, dawn was just touching the blinds. I stared at the ceiling, the faint hum of Mason's computer still whispering through the hallway. My mind replayed every moment of Craig's childhood, the school plays, the graduation, the first time he held Mason in his arms. I wondered when exactly he'd lost himself. Somewhere between grief and greed, he'd walked away from grace. As the sun broke over the neighborhood, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. Sometimes love isn't soft. Sometimes it's a reckoning. And sometimes the child you raise to be kind becomes the one who teaches you what strength really means. Downstairs, Mason's footsteps echoed lightly. He was making breakfast, humming the same gospel tune his grandmother used to sing when times were hard. It sounded like hope, but it also sounded like warning. Because I knew what was coming next, and when it hit, it wouldn't just shake this house. It would shake every truth I thought I knew about family. The moment he said business trip, I felt the lie hit me like a punch to the chest. It wasn't even a good lie. It was thin, lazy, the kind you tell when you've already decided you don't owe the truth to anyone anymore. His clothes were spilling out of the suitcase, shirts half inside out, socks crushed under the weight of that one reckless decision. The laptop on his bed glowed with an open email. Something about wire transfers, numbers, names I didn't recognize. My son didn't notice me looking. He was too busy zipping and unzipping like the sound itself could drown out the guilt. "Business trip, huh?" I asked, forcing calm into my voice. He didn't answer, just reached for his wallet. "Since when does tech support send people out of state?" I took one step closer, but the air between us had already turned to glass, fragile, ready to shatter. He sighed like I was the one making a mess of things. "Pop, please. Don't start." That word pop used to mean love, trust, connection. Tonight it sounded like an insult. "Don't start," I repeated. "You've been distant for months. You show up late, you talk less, and now you're leaving with half your life in a bag. And you want me not to start?" He froze for half a second, his jaw tightening before he finally looked up. His eyes used to shine brown and bright like fresh coffee. Now they were flat-clouded, a stranger's eyes in my son's face. "I just need some time," he said. "I'll call." Call. Like I was some distant relative, not the man who taught him how to throw a ball, how to shave, how to pray when life turned ugly. I took a step toward him, keeping my voice low. "Does this have to do with her?" The question came out before I could stop it. His body tensed. That was all the answer I needed. "Pop," he warned. "Don't. I'm not blind, son. I've seen the text, the new clothes, the way you leave the table when your phone lights up. You're running with the wrong kind of woman." I tried to steady my breathing, but my pulse was in my ears. "And you're taking money that isn't yours." That's when he snapped. "You think you know everything, don't you? Always watching, always judging." His voice rose sharp enough to cut. "You think you're the only one allowed to make mistakes? I've given everything to this family, and what did I get back? Guilt, responsibility. Nothing for me." I stared at him, stunned. This was my son, the boy who used to sit beside me at church singing loud and off-key. "You're not leaving for peace, you're leaving for greed," I said quietly. "And you're too proud to see the difference." He turned his back and shoved another shirt into the bag. "I'm done talking." He walked past me, the scent of cologne and cold sweat lingering in the air. I reached for his arm just to make him stop long enough to see me, to see what he was throwing away. "Don't walk out that door, Craig." My voice cracked on his name. "Once you do, you don't come back the same." He stopped at the top of the stairs, the suitcase handle clenched in his hand. For a heartbeat I thought he might drop it. But then he looked down the hall toward Mason's room, and something hardened in him. "He's better off without me." "He's 13, I said, disbelief turning to anger. "He needs his father." "He's got one," he said, and nodded at me like he was granting a favor. Then he started down the stairs. I followed, my mind racing, searching for the words that could reach him. But there are moments when words don't work anymore. When a man decides he's done listening, even God himself could whisper in his ear, and it wouldn't matter. At the front door, Mason looked up from his homework. His pencil froze mid-equation. "Dad," he said softly. Craig hesitated, his hand on the knob. The air in that room went still. "I'll be gone a while," he muttered. "Your granddad's got you covered." "That's it," I said. "That's how you leave your boy." He turned to me, face blank, voice calm. "I can't breathe here anymore." That sentence didn't sound like escape. It sounded like surrender. He opened the door, and the night wind swept in, carrying the smell of rain and the faint hum of a passing train. Mason's eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. He just said, "Okay, Dad." Simple. Small. And it broke me in half. The door shut behind him. I stood there staring at the grain of the wood, at the faint marks from years of Knox visitors' laughter. It felt like a tombstone now. Mason put his pencil down, walked over and hugged me around the waist. "He's not coming back," he said. I didn't answer. Because he was right. Later I watched from the window as the headlights faded into the darkness. The sound of that car rolling down the street reminded me of every promise a man can break if he's desperate enough. The street lamp flickered once, throwing long shadows across our porch. In that moment, I realized something I'd been too afraid to admit. Whatever my son had become, he wasn't lost by accident. Somewhere along the way, he'd chosen this path, step by step, lie by lie, until he believed his own story. When I turned from the window, Mason was gone. I found him upstairs again, sitting at the computer, the light from the screen washing over his face. "Go to bed, son," I said. He shook his head without looking up. "I just need to check something." His voice was calm, measured, too steady for a child. "About Dad?" I asked. "About what he took." Something in his tone made my stomach twist. I wanted to tell him to leave it alone, to let the adults fix it, But the truth was, there were no adults left. Just me and a boy trying to make sense of a man who stopped being a father the second he started running. I turned away, letting the sound of his typing follow me down the hall. The house felt colder now, emptier, like it had lost its rhythm. In the living room, I picked up the family Bible from the side table. It was open to a verse my wife had underlined years ago. "Be sure your sin will find you out." I closed it, whispering under my breath, "Lord, make it so." I sat there till morning, watching the first streaks of dawn creep across the floorboards, wondering how a man could save his family from a wound that came from inside it. Upstairs, the typing finally stopped. A door creaked shut. Somewhere in my chest, faith and fury wrestled for space. The world outside was waking up, birds singing, cars starting, the neighbor's radio playing faint blues through the window. But inside our house, everything had changed. The man I raised was gone. The boy I was raising was becoming something else entirely. And I didn't know it then, but the next time I'd hear my son's voice, it wouldn't come from a phone call or a doorstep. It would come through the static of a police report, and the story that followed would burn through everything I thought I knew about justice, love, and blood. The photo slipped from the dresser when I brushed past it, face down on the hardwood. The sound was small, but it cut through the silence, sharper than any shout. I picked it up, and there she was, my wife Evelyn, smiling the way only she could. One arm cradled baby Mason, the other rested on my shoulder. The frame's glass had cracked clean across her face, splitting her smile in two. I just stood there, thumb tracing the jagged line, feeling something inside me split the same way. That picture had been by our bed for 15 years, through every storm, every prayer whispered between exhaustion and faith. It was the last thing I packed away when she died, and the first thing I unpacked when I realized I couldn't live without her memory close by. The light from the window hit the glass, scattering pieces of her smile across the wall like ghosts of a happier time. I sat down on the edge of the bed, holding the photo against my chest, breathing slow, trying not to cry. Evelyn used to tell me that every trial had its scripture, that pain was proof we were still alive enough to love. But I was tired of being alive like this. Tired of feeling every echo of her absence, especially now that the son we raised had become a stranger. I could still hear her laugh in that room, faint and warm, mixing with the soft hum of the box fan that had outlived her by a decade. I remembered how she used to sing to Mason when he was just a baby, humming those old gospel tunes her mother taught her back in Selma. The melody always drifted through the house like sunlight through lace curtains, gentle, holy, and unbothered by the world's noise. Tonight that silence mocked me. I set the photo on the nightstand, careful not to let it fall again. The crack in the glass caught the light, splitting her eyes into two separate reflections. It made me think about the kind of man I'd been, two versions of myself, one she'd loved and one that failed to keep our family together after she was gone. The night she died, I promised her I'd raise Craig right. I'd keep him steady, teach him integrity, faith, humility. And for a while I did, until grief made him restless and the world whispered louder than my guidance ever could. I remembered the day of her funeral, how Craig had stood stiff beside the casket, not crying, not moving. People said he was strong. I knew better. He wasn't strong, he was shutting down. After she was buried, he started working late, staying out, chasing something he couldn't name, and I, blind with my own sorrow, let him drift away. I told myself he'd come back when he was ready, but children don't always come back the same. The wind outside picked up, rattling the window. I could smell rain again, thick and heavy, the kind that always reminded me of her favorite afternoons, sitting on the porch with sweet tea and a blanket, watching the sky turn silver. She said storms were just heaven washing itself clean. But this storm didn't feel like cleansing. It felt like warning. I got up and walked down the hallway toward Mason's room, the photo still in my hand. He was asleep now, his face buried in the pillow, the glow of his laptop finally gone. I pulled the blanket up over his shoulders and whispered a prayer under my breath. Lord, protect this boy from inheriting his father's sins. I looked at him and saw both of them, Evelyn's gentleness in his eyes, Craig's stubbornness in his jawline. I wondered which side would win in the years ahead. When I turned to leave, I noticed Craig's old baseball cap hanging on the hook by the door, the same one Evelyn used to wash by hand because he refused to let it go even when it smelled like sweat in summer. It was faded now, the stitching frayed, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It felt sacred somehow, like the ghost of the boy who used to run barefoot through the backyard shouting, "Pop catch!" I missed that sound more than I could admit. Back in my room, I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every memory of Evelyn brought another memory of what we'd lost, the night she held Craig after his nightmares, the afternoon she'd bake cornbread while he sat at the counter doing homework, the way she'd say, "This house is held up by love, not lumber." I looked around and realized the love had gone out with her, leaving only the wood. The phone on the dresser buzzed, breaking the stillness. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice, cautious but urgent. "Mr. Porter," she said, "this is Vanessa from the credit union. I think we need to talk about your son." My stomach dropped. She hesitated before continuing. "There's been unusual activity. I tried reaching Craig, but his lines disconnected." I gripped the edge of the dresser. "What kind of activity?" "Withdrawals," she said softly. "Large ones, transfers offshore, and some documents that don't look legitimate." Her voice cracked like she didn't want to say more. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the wall for a long moment. The photo of Evelyn was still catching the light, her cracked smile watching me like she already knew. I sat back down, the phone still warm in my hand. The rage came slow, quiet, the kind that doesn't burn but freezes. My own son had stolen from the family his mother built with her bare hands. I looked at the photo again and whispered, "I failed you, Evie. I thought love was enough to keep him right." The rain started to pour, then slapping against the roof like a heartbeat. I closed my eyes and let the sound fill the room, imagining her voice riding on the storm. I don't know how long I sat there before I realized Mason was standing in the doorway, barefoot, sleepy but alert. "You okay, Grandpa?" he asked. I wiped my face before answering. "Yeah, baby, just thinking." He nodded, walked over and climbed onto the bed beside me. "Dad's not coming back, is he?" he asked. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell him fathers always come home. But I couldn't. "No," I said finally, not the way he was. Mason leaned his head against my shoulder, silent. We sat like that for a while, 2 generations staring at the photo of the woman who once kept us whole. The thunder rolled deep and distant, and for the first time since she died, I felt something stir, a mix of grief and purpose. Maybe this was her way of telling me not to give up yet. I kissed Mason's forehead and told him to go back to bed. When he was gone, I reached for the cracked photo one last time and set it face down on the nightstand. The sound of the storm swallowed the house, and I knew before morning came I'd have to make a choice. Because the next call wouldn't be from a banker. It would be from someone telling me just how far my son had fallen and what it was going to take to bring him back from the edge. He was halfway out the door when I said it, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "We can fix this, son. As a family." My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to, cracked and desperate, like it had been dragged through years of prayer and disappointment. He didn't even turn around. He just shook his head, that cold little half shake that said more than any argument could. "There is no family," he said, quiet but final, like he was closing a coffin lid. Those words didn't echo, they sank. They dropped somewhere deep inside me, somewhere that used to hold faith. I'd been raised in a world where family was everything. It wasn't just blood. It was Sunday dinners, barbecues that lasted all day, church bells that called us together even when we didn't want to be. My own father used to say, "Son, the Lord might test your patience, but he never tests your love." But standing there in that hallway, watching my boy throw away everything sacred, I realized maybe that wasn't true anymore. He brushed past me, suitcase in hand, and the smell of rain hit me again as the door cracked open. I wanted to reach out to grab his arm to remind him who he was. But something in his eyes told me the boy I raised wasn't standing there anymore. There was only the man he'd become, hard, hollow, unrecognizable. Craig. I said, my voice breaking on the name. You walk out that door and you'll regret it. Maybe not tonight, but one day you'll remember this moment and it'll tear you apart. He stopped for a second, shoulders tense, like maybe he'd heard something familiar in my tone. But then he said, you've been trying to fix everything since Mom died, Pop. Maybe you're the one who needs to stop. And then he left. Just like that. The door shut. The wind followed him out, and I was left staring at the empty space where my son had stood. I stood there so long I could hear the old clock ticking from the living room, steady and cruel, marking the moment our family stopped being one. I walked back into the living room, the same room that used to overflow with laughter on Christmas Eve. The same room where Evelyn and I once danced after everyone went home. The walls felt closer now, the air thicker. I sat in her old armchair and stared at the photo on the mantel. Evelyn in her Sunday hat, Mason in her arms, Craig with his arm around them both. The three of them smiling like we were untouchable. I'd built my life around that picture. I'd built my faith around it. The phone rang again, but I didn't move. I knew it would be more bad news. Instead, I closed my eyes and whispered, Lord, you gave me this family. Don't let me lose what's left of it. My voice cracked in the quiet. I'd said those kinds of prayers before, when Evelyn was sick, when Craig dropped out of college, when Mason was born too early. But this one felt different. It felt like the kind of prayer that goes unanswered. When I finally picked up the phone, the voice on the other end wasn't Vanessa this time. It was Pastor Henry. He'd heard about Craig leaving. News traveled fast in our little Birmingham neighborhood. Brother Porter, he said gently, I know this hurts, but sometimes you gotta let the prodigal walk. The Lord's gotta show him the pig pen before he remembers the feast. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe my son would find his way back the way the good book promised. But I wasn't sure faith could survive this kind of betrayal. It's one thing to lose your money, your peace, even your name. But when your own child throws away your love, your faith feels like a broken promise. That night I couldn't sleep. The house made new sounds I'd never noticed before. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint whistle through the windows, Mason's slow breathing down the hall. It all felt wrong. I walked out onto the porch, the rain finally slowing to a drizzle. The streetlight flickered at the corner, painting the wet pavement in gold. I thought about the first time I held Craig in this very spot. He was just a baby then, crying so hard the neighbors came over thinking something was wrong. Evelyn laughed, said, he just wants to be held. She was right, like always. I remember that warmth, that weight in my arms. The miracle of it. The thought that God had trusted me with something so precious. And now, years later, I stood there empty-handed, wondering if that same God was still listening. Inside, I heard movement, small, cautious footsteps. Mason appeared in the doorway, wrapped in his blanket. You're up late again, he said. His voice was soft, tired. Couldn't sleep, I answered. He nodded, then looked out into the rain. He's really gone, huh? I nodded. For now. Mason came and sat beside me, his head barely reaching my shoulder. Grandma used to say, faith is what you hold on to when love feels gone, he whispered. I smiled sadly. Your grandma was a wise woman. We sat there in silence, the kind that isn't empty, but full of everything words can't fix. Mason finally turned to me. What if faith isn't enough, Grandpa? What if some people don't come back? I didn't have an answer. I wanted to say something comforting, something strong, but all I could do was tell him the truth. Then we keep believing anyway. He nodded, and for a second I saw Evelyn in his eyes. Steady, brave, kind. Okay, he said quietly, then stood up. I'm going to go finish something. I think you should see it tomorrow. Before I could ask what he meant, he was already walking back inside his small frame swallowed by the doorway. I stayed there a while longer, watching the storm die and the sky lighten just a little. Somewhere in that gray horizon, I felt a shift. Not forgiveness, not peace, but something close. The ache was still there, but it was joined by a flicker of something else: resolve. Because faith, I realized, isn't about waiting for God to fix everything. Sometimes it's about standing up in the ruins and deciding the story isn't over yet. When I finally went inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and wood smoke. Mason's door was closed, the faint sound of typing coming from inside. I thought of how young he was, how much weight he carried already, and how much more was coming. I paused at his door, listening, wanting to tell him how proud his grandmother would have been. But before I could, my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Something told me this one wasn't about money or faith. This call would be the beginning of everything that came next. When the door shut behind him, it wasn't just the sound of wood and metal. It was the sound of love leaving. The air in the house seemed to collapse in on itself, thick and unmoving. Every room felt smaller, quieter, as if the walls were trying to hold in what little warmth was left. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the spot where he'd stood, where my son, my own flesh, had looked at me like I was a stranger. The rain outside had stopped, but the stillness it left behind pressed on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. The old church clock on the mantel ticked steady, each sound deliberate, almost cruel. Evelyn used to say that clock sounded like a heartbeat, proof that our home was alive. Now it sounded like it was counting down the seconds until everything I'd built finally fell apart. I sat in her chair, the one she used to rock Mason to sleep in, and for a long time I didn't move. My hands trembled, and I clenched them together until my knuckles went white. I wouldn't cry. Not yet. Tears were private in my world. They were prayers that didn't need words, and I wasn't ready to send this one up to heaven just yet. The smell of Craig's cologne still lingered in the air, sharp and unfamiliar. It mixed with the scent of old books, lemon polish, and rain-soaked earth from the porch. It was strange how a house could feel full of memories and still be empty. I glanced toward the kitchen. The table was still set for 3. Mason's half-eaten sandwich sat beside his glass of milk, untouched since the moment his father walked out. The chair across from him, Craig's chair, was pushed back at an odd angle the way he'd left it. I didn't touch it. Maybe part of me wanted to pretend he'd come back to fix it. I could hear Mason upstairs pacing softly. He didn't say a word. The boy was learning, too young, what silence can do, how it can choke or protect depending on how you wear it. I wanted to call up to him to tell him that everything would be okay, but the lie would have caught in my throat. He didn't need false hope. He needed truth, and the truth was that we'd both been abandoned by the same man. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes. For a moment I imagined Evelyn sitting across from me, her Bible in her lap, her voice steady and sure. "Hold your head high," she'd say. "You don't let pain make you small." I could almost hear her hum one of her hymns, the ones she'd sing while cooking, slow, heavy with faith, the kind that could break your heart and mend it in the same verse. But when I opened my eyes, all that was left was the ticking clock. The night dragged on. Every sound became louder, the creak of the floorboards, the wind against the window, the faint rustle of Mason's bedsheets. I thought about going to him, telling him stories about his grandmother, about how love isn't always soft, sometimes it's survival. But my body felt anchored to the chair. I was afraid that if I stood up, if I moved, the silence would follow me, cling to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Around midnight the phone rang again. The sound tore through the quiet like thunder. I jumped, heart pounding. Unknown number. I let it ring. Whoever it was could wait. I didn't have the strength for another voice, another reminder of everything I couldn't fix. When it stopped, the silence returned heavier than before. I walked to the window. The street was slick with rain, the reflection of the streetlight shimmering across the pavement. Somewhere down the block a dog barked, then went quiet. I remembered when Craig was Mason's age, how he'd sneak out after curfew, and I'd catch him walking up the driveway, barefoot, shoes in his hands to keep from making noise. He'd smile that guilty smile of his, and I'd pretend to be angry. "You think I can't hear those floorboards?" I used to say. And he'd laugh, promise it wouldn't happen again. But even then I'd see it, the restlessness, the same itch that drove him away now. I turned from the window, my reflection barely visible in the dark glass. I looked older than I remembered, grayer, smaller, the kind of man who'd given his best years to a family that no longer existed. I sat back down and let the memories wash over me, the wedding, the laughter, the smell of Evelyn's cornbread baking on Sundays. All of it blurred into one long ache. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Light, hesitant. Mason appeared, rubbing his eyes, his blanket draped over his shoulders. He didn't say anything, just walked over and sat beside me. His little hand rested on mine, steady and warm. I didn't look at him, afraid that if I did, the tears I'd been holding back would finally fall. We sat there like that, listening to the clock tick between us. After a while, he spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "Grandpa, are you mad at him?" I thought about that. Anger would have been easier. But what I felt wasn't that simple. It was a mix of heartbreak and pride, guilt and grace. "No," I said finally. "I'm just sad. Sad that he forgot where he came from. Sad that he doesn't see what he's leaving behind." Mason nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "He'll see it one day," he said softly. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Maybe." He stayed with me a little longer, then stood up. "Good night, Grandpa," he said, and started back up the stairs. Halfway up, he paused. "When I grow up, I'm not going to leave like that." His words hit me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "I know you won't," I told him. He disappeared into his room and the house went quiet again. I sat there until dawn, the first light creeping across the curtains, the clock still ticking. My hands finally stopped trembling. There was no use wishing for what couldn't be undone. I'd bury my grief in silence, the way my father had, the way his father had before him. But deep down I knew this silence wouldn't last forever, because soon someone would come knocking, and when they did, they wouldn't be bringing comfort or forgiveness. They'd be bringing the truth, and the truth was about to tear this quiet house apart. When I woke the next morning, the house still felt hollow, but there was a strange calm in the air, the kind that comes after a storm when the damage is done, but the silence holds its breath before the reckoning. I walked into the kitchen expecting to find Mason still asleep, but he was sitting at the table, laptop open, papers spread out like a young man running an investigation. The morning sun slipped through the blinds, striping his face with gold and shadow. He didn't look up when I entered, just muttered, "Morning, Grandpa," his tone steady, purposeful, too old for 13. I poured myself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, watching him. He was typing something with focus fingers flying over the keys. "You been up all night?" I asked. He nodded once. "Had to check a few things." His voice was calm, but there was a flicker in it. Anger, sharp and quiet, the kind that doesn't fade. He turned the laptop toward me and my stomach clenched. On the screen were bank statements, dates, transactions, money moving out of our accounts into places I didn't recognize. "Dad didn't just take from us," he said, voice low. "He took from Grandma's scholarship fund, the one you both started at the church." My knees almost gave out. That scholarship had been Evelyn's dream. She'd saved for years, tutoring kids after choir practice, saying every child deserves a door that opens. Craig had been the first name on that account when we set it up. The irony burned like acid in my throat. Mason kept going. "He used my college account too," he said. "I tracked it through his email. He's been wiring money to a woman named Vanessa, some kind of scam artist. They set up fake companies together. He's been pulling this for months." His tone was matter of fact, but his jaw was tight. "I already filed a report. I used your name. You'll need to confirm it later." I stared at him, not sure whether to be proud or terrified. "Mason," I said carefully, "you shouldn't be mixed up in this. This isn't your burden." He looked up then, and for a second I saw something in his eyes that stopped me cold. Evelyn's strength. That quiet, steady kind of courage that came from faith, not fury. "It is my burden," he said softly. "He's my father. And he hurt you. He hurt Grandma's memory. I can't just sit here." He turned back to the laptop, clicking through files, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen. "I traced their messages," he continued. "They used encrypted email, but she slipped once logged in from a local cafe downtown. I sent everything to the authorities. I don't think he knows yet." I took a step closer, heart pounding. "What do you mean he doesn't know yet?" Mason glanced at the clock. "He will soon." That was when I realized what he'd done. My grandson, 13 years old, had started something that couldn't be undone. The thought terrified me, but beneath the fear was something else, something fierce. Pride. The kind that swells in your chest when you see a spark of the family's fire burn in the youngest member. I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your grandmother would be proud," I said quietly. He didn't smile. "I'm not doing this for pride," he said. "I'm doing this because right is right." For a long while we sat in silence. The old clock ticked again, softer now, almost respectful. The coffee in my cup went cold. Mason finally closed the laptop and leaned back, his eyes weary but alive with purpose. "You always said faith without works is dead," he murmured. I guess I just wanted to prove I was listening. I didn't trust my voice enough to respond. I just nodded, staring at this boy who carried the strength of 3 generations in his small frame. Evelyn would have loved that. She'd always said the Lord skips no generation when planting seeds of courage. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The sun broke through the clouds, hitting the stained glass window we'd installed after Evelyn's passing. The light splintered across the room in soft reds and blues, landing right on Mason's face. For a second, he looked like something out of a painting, a warrior disguised as a child. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and frowned. "Unknown number," he said. I froze. Something cold crawled up my spine. "Don't answer it," I said quickly. He hesitated, then silenced it. We exchanged a look. He didn't need to ask who it might be. I moved toward the window, parting the curtain just enough to see the street. Nothing yet. No car, no movement. But the air outside felt heavy, tense. The world holds its breath before judgment. Mason stood and stretched, rolling his shoulders like a man twice his age. "You think he'll come back here?" he asked. "If he does," I said, "he won't find the man he left behind." He nodded, understanding more than he should. "Good," he said simply. Then he went upstairs, muttering something about making copies of the evidence just in case. When he was gone, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the faint fingerprint smudge he'd left on the laptop screen. My grandson, the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee, was now building digital traps to expose his own father. I didn't know whether to weep or thank God for giving him the strength I'd lost. I thought about Evelyn again, about her faith, her fire, her unshakable belief that light could come from the darkest places. Maybe this was what she meant. Maybe this was the proof that love doesn't die with the people we lose, it passes forward, reshaped, reborn in the ones who remain. The clock struck noon, its chime ringing through the house like a hymn. I looked around at the scattered papers, the quiet rooms, the ghost of my son's presence still lingering in the air. For the first time in days, I didn't feel helpless. Because sometimes salvation doesn't come from the pulpit or the prayers. It comes from the youngest voice in the room, calm and certain, saying, "Don't worry, Grandpa. I'll handle this." And deep down, I knew he would. But as the sun climbed higher and the phone on the table buzzed again, I felt it in my bones. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Something was coming, and it had my family's name written all over it. The house was supposed to be asleep, but something about the quiet felt wrong. Too heavy, too alert. The clock had struck midnight hours ago, yet I hadn't closed my eyes once. The night had that stillness only found after long rain, clean air that hides the rot underneath. I walked down the hall, every step creaking like a confession. The door to Mason's room was cracked open, a sliver of cold blue light spilling into the hallway. I thought he was dreaming with the TV on, but when I pushed the door open, I saw him sitting at his desk, back straight, face lit by the glow of the computer screen. He didn't look up when I entered. His eyes were locked, unblinking, moving fast as his fingers danced over the keyboard. "What are you doing awake, son?" I asked, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't startle him. He didn't answer right away, just clicked through file after file. Then he whispered, "You need to see this." I stepped closer, the floor cool beneath my feet, the hum of the machine filling the silence between us. On the screen were folders labeled with names: Craig Porter, Vanessa Hill, multiple aliases stacked like layers of deceit. My heart started pounding as the reality unfolded before me. It wasn't just that my son had taken what wasn't his. He had built an empire of lies out of our family's trust. Mason's voice was steady, too steady for a child. "I traced everything. He created fake business accounts, used your tax ID, Grandpa. He took out loans in your name, ones the bank hasn't even flagged yet." He clicked again, showing email chains, scanned documents, signatures that looked eerily like mine. "This is identity fraud," he said, eyes never leaving the screen. I felt the floor tilt under me. "Lord have mercy," I whispered, gripping the back of his chair to keep my balance. "He did this to me." Mason nodded, jaw tightening. "To both of us. Grandma's fund, your savings, my education account. They're all tied up in this." He pulled up another document, a transfer list that stretched for pages. "He's been laundering money through shell companies. And she's helping him. The woman Vanessa." I'd heard her voice once, faint on the phone, sweet as honey but slick underneath. I'd known she was trouble. Evelyn would have known too. She always said you can hear the devil better when he whispers softly. I sat down on the edge of Mason's bed, staring at the flickering light on the wall. "How long have you known?" I asked. He hesitated. "A few weeks." The answer hit me harder than I expected. "You've been carrying this alone." He turned to me, then his eyes rimmed red but burning bright. "I had to. I didn't know how to tell you without breaking you. That broke me anyway." I looked at my grandson, 13 years old, awake in the middle of the night, fighting a war that should have been mine to fight. "You shouldn't have to protect me," I said, my voice catching. "That's my job." He shook his head. "Not tonight." He pointed to a flashing alert on the screen. "See this? The system flagged another withdrawal just 2 hours ago. He's still moving money." I leaned forward, my reflection ghostly in the screen. The numbers blurred together, but I could make out the total. Almost everything, every dime Evelyn and I had saved since we first bought this house. I thought of her face, the way she used to count every dollar with quiet pride, saying, "We may not have much, but what we have we earned with clean hands." Now those clean hands were stained by our own blood. I stood up, pacing. My breath came shallow. "We'll go to the police tomorrow," I said. "You'll give them everything you've got." Mason closed the laptop and finally looked at me, his expression older than it should have been. "Already did. I filed a report under your name, attached the evidence. But—" He hesitated, then continued. "I also sent a copy to his employer. They'll see it when they clock in tomorrow morning." I turned sharply. "You did what he didn't flinch. He doesn't deserve to keep walking free while you lose everything." I wanted to scold him, to tell him this wasn't how justice worked, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down I knew he was right. What Craig had done wasn't just theft. It was desecration. He'd taken our money, yes, but he'd also gutted our history, stripped the dignity from every prayer we'd ever said as a family. I sat down again, this time across from Mason. "You're not scared?" I asked. He looked at me, his expression calm, like a man who's already seen too much to be afraid anymore. "I was," he said. "At first. But then I remembered something Grandma used to say, evil hides in the dark until you turn on the light. So that's what I did. I turned it on. For a long moment neither of us spoke. The sound of rain had faded, replaced by the distant rumble of thunder moving out of town. The air smelled like wet earth and electricity, that sharp scent right before something changes. I reached out and took his hand. "You did good, son," I said softly. "Too good. But from now on you let me carry the weight." He nodded but didn't promise. I knew he wouldn't. The light from the screen faded as he shut the laptop. The darkness that filled the room felt different this time, less like despair, more like a pause before action. When I stood to leave, he spoke again, barely above a whisper. "Grandpa." "Yes. What if he comes back?" I turned toward the window. Outside, the street was empty, but I could feel it, the pulse of something waiting beyond the silence. "Then he'll find the light on," I said. Mason nodded, closing the laptop completely. "Good." I walked back to my room, the house still and breathing around me. On the dresser, the cracked photo of Evelyn caught the faintest glimmer from the hallway light. I picked it up and stared at her face, the break in the glass slicing across her smile like prophecy. For the first time in years, I spoke out loud to her picture. "You were right, Evie. The devil doesn't knock loud, he moves in quietly in the ones we love." I set the photo down and sat on the edge of the bed, the truth still ringing in my head. My son hadn't just stolen from me. He'd stolen from the very foundation we built our lives on. But as I listened to the faint sound of Mason breathing down the hall, steady and strong, I realized something else too. The sins of one generation might break a house, but the strength of the next could rebuild it brick by brick. Still, even as I said it, a chill crept up my spine, because I knew the night wasn't done with us yet. The phone would ring again before dawn, and this time it wouldn't be a warning. It would be the consequence. When I heard the full number down to the last cent, something inside me went still. Not broken, not shattered, just still. Like the moment before a storm touches down. Mason sat across from me, watching carefully, waiting for me to explode, to curse the name of the man who'd stolen our lives. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just stared at the bank statement, the empty balance glaring up from the paper, cold and unapologetic. My breath came out slow, heavy. "Lord, give me strength," I whispered, because that was the only thing left to ask for. Anger had never scared me before. I'd faced it all my life at work, in church meetings, in hospital rooms where death came too early. But this was different. This anger wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It was quiet, righteous, and dangerously calm. A man who still believes in justice learns to hold his fury like a blade, not swinging it, just sharpening it. I sat there feeling the edge form. Mason broke the silence first. "They froze his accounts," he said. "The fraud division said it'll take a few days to trace everything." His voice trembled just a little, like he wasn't sure if I'd even heard him. I nodded but kept my eyes on the paper. "You did good," I said softly. "Now we let the Lord handle the rest." He frowned. "You really think that's enough?" I looked up. "It has to be." He didn't understand, not yet, that justice doesn't always come fast. Sometimes it limps, sometimes it crawls, but it always arrives when you least expect it. Evelyn used to say that too, back when I'd come home angry about something unfair at work. "You don't have to swing at every fight," she'd tell me, "because time's got the longest reach of all." I folded the statement neatly, slid it into the drawer beside the Bible she'd left me. My hands were steady again, but my heart wasn't. I walked to the window. The night outside was restless wind pushing the trees, clouds dragging across the moon like bruises. Somewhere in that darkness, my son was out there, maybe sleeping soundly, maybe running scared. Either way, he'd left a trail, and truth has a way of following you home, whether you want it or not. Mason came to stand beside me. "What if he tries to come back here?" he asked. His reflection in the glass looked smaller than I wanted it to. "Then we'll meet him at the door," I said. But not with anger. Then how? With truth. That's the only thing a liar can't fight. He didn't answer, but his hand found mine, small and warm. The boy was brave, braver than I'd been at his age. I could see the questions piling up behind his eyes, the kind no child should have to ask. How could a father do this? How do you forgive someone who steals not just money, but faith? I didn't have answers yet, only endurance. The kind that comes from years of walking through storms with no umbrella but prayer. The phone rang again, sharp in the silence. I picked it up, half expecting the worst, but it was the bank's investigator confirming what Mason had already uncovered: multiple fraudulent loans, false documents pending criminal charges. I thanked her, hung up, and sat back down. "Is it over?" Mason asked. I shook my head. "Not yet, but it will be." He opened his mouth to say something, then stopped listening. The sound was faint but clear, a car engine idling outside. My stomach tightened. Mason looked at me, eyes wide. "It's him," he whispered. I moved to the window, careful not to disturb the curtain. Headlights cut through the dark, washing over the porch, then went out. For a few seconds nothing moved. Then I saw him. Craig, standing in the yard like a ghost dragged back from its grave. His shoulders hunched, his clothes soaked through from the mist. He didn't move toward the house, just stood there staring up at it like it was something sacred he'd burned down by mistake. "Stay here," I told Mason. He started to protest, but I gave him that look, the same one my father used to give me when words weren't needed. I opened the door slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. The air was cold, biting. Craig didn't look surprised to see me. "Pop," he said quietly. His voice was rough, cracked at the edges. I didn't answer. I waited. "I know what you found," he said finally. "It's not what it looks like." I almost laughed. "You drained your mother's scholarship fund, Craig. You stole from your own son's future. What else could it be?" He swallowed hard, looking down at his hands. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. Vanessa. She said she'd help me fix it. I thought I could put it back before anyone noticed. Put it back." My voice stayed calm. Too calm. Like it was spare change. He looked up, eyes wet but defiant. "You think I wanted this life? You think I wanted to struggle every day, watching you get older, waiting for me to take care of you when I can barely take care of myself? I just wanted a way out." I stepped closer, feeling the anger simmer but not boil. "You wanted out, and you dug a hole. You didn't just take our money. Craig, you took our name, our legacy." He shook his head, desperate now. "I can fix it, Pop. I'll turn myself in, work it off, whatever it takes." I looked at him for a long moment. The boy I raised was still in there somewhere, buried under greed and fear. But love doesn't mean letting sin go unpunished. "You don't fix a wound by hiding the knife," I said quietly. "You face what you did." He dropped to his knees in the mud, hands clasped, sobbing. "Please, Pop." Behind me the screen door creaked open. Mason's small voice cut through the night. "You already had a chance, Dad." Craig turned, eyes wide. He didn't say a word. The wind picked up, sending the porch light swinging. For a moment all three of us stood there, 3 generations caught between forgiveness and justice. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him back into the warmth of what was left of our family, but I didn't. I couldn't. "Go home," I said finally. "Not here, wherever it is you think home still exists for you. Tomorrow the police will come. You'll tell them everything. That's how you start fixing this." He stared at me, broken. "You're turning me in. I'm letting the truth do it." He nodded once, then stood slowly, wiping his face with a shaking hand. "I guess I deserve that," he muttered. Then he turned, walked back toward the car, and disappeared into the night. I stood there long after the engine faded, the cold cutting through my bones. Mason came to stand beside me, silent. We watched the darkness swallow the last trace of his father. I should have felt relief. But what I felt was heavier, something between sorrow and peace. I whispered one more prayer into the wind. "Lord, don't let anger guide me. Let justice find him." The wind answered with a low moan through the trees, like the world itself was listening. Inside, the clock struck 3. Mason squeezed my hand, and I knew this wasn't the end. Because forgiveness, like faith, always demands proof. And by morning, proof was exactly what we were going to get. The next morning, sunlight crept across the porch like a hesitant visitor, warm but uncertain. I hadn't slept. My eyes burned from the weight of the night before, from the image of Craig's face as he vanished into the dark. I could still hear his voice in the wind, soft, cracked, begging for forgiveness I wasn't ready to give. But as the morning light filled the house, something shifted. The silence no longer felt hollow. It felt sacred, like the pause after a hymn ends and before the congregation breathes again. Mason was already awake, sitting at the table with a notebook open, writing something in his careful, deliberate way. The kid was always thinking, always one step ahead. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes clearer than mine. I backed up everything he said simply. The files, the evidence, even the emails. They're safe now. I nodded. My throat was dry. Good work. He closed the notebook, straightened it on the table, and folded his hands the way his grandmother used to before prayer. What happens now? He asked. I stared out the window at the yard. The soil was still wet from last night's rain, glinting under the sun like spilled oil. Now, I said, we rebuild. He tilted his head. Rebuild what? Everything, I answered. Faith, family, the name he tried to bury. He didn't speak again, but his eyes held mine, and I saw it there, the fire. The kind that comes when innocence burns away and leaves something stronger behind. I saw Evelyn too, her calm grace living inside that boy's steady heart. I sat across from him and poured 2 cups of coffee, one black for me, one mostly milk for him, the way she used to make it. When we drank in silence, I thought of something Pastor Henry once said years ago, back when I still believed the world could be fixed with hard work and prayer. Sometimes God breaks what we built, he told me, to show what can be rebuilt. I never understood it then, but I did now. God had broken my son. He had broken me. But in the pieces he'd planted something new, a seed of redemption hiding in a 13-year-old boy's resolve. After breakfast, Mason followed me to the porch. The morning air smelled clean, alive. The neighborhood was waking up, neighbors sweeping driveways, a dog barking, church bells faint in the distance. Normal sounds. Sounds of life continuing even when yours has been cracked in two. I sat down in Evelyn's rocking chair, the one that groaned under her weight when she sang her favorite hymns. Mason leaned on the railing, squinting into the sunlight. "Do you think he'll come back?" he asked. I thought about that for a long time. Maybe, I said finally. But not soon. Some journeys take a man through darkness before he remembers what the light looks like. He nodded slowly, absorbing that like scripture. Will you forgive him? That question landed heavy like a stone dropped in still water. Forgiveness isn't a doorway, I said. It's a road. And I just stepped onto it. He looked down, kicking at the wood beneath his feet. Grandma would have forgiven him by now. I smiled faintly. That's because your grandma was made of grace. I'm just trying to catch up. The truth was, I didn't know if I could ever truly forgive Craig. But I also knew that holding on to anger would poison everything left standing. Evelyn had taught me that love wasn't soft, it was endurance. And sitting there watching Mason's shoulders squared against the morning light, I realized love hadn't died in this house. It had just changed its shape. Mason disappeared inside for a moment and came back holding the cracked photo of Evelyn. I fixed it, he said. He'd taped the glass carefully, piece by piece, so her face was whole again. The tape caught the sunlight, shimmering like tiny rivers. I took it from him, my fingers brushing his. Looks better than new, I said. He grinned, a rare thing, quick and bright. I thought she should be where she belongs. He set the picture back on the mantel, right above the clock that had been marking our heartbreak hour by hour. The pendulum swung gently, steady as faith. We spent the afternoon repairing what we could, the loose boards on the porch, the broken latch on the gate. Small work, but holy in its own way. Every nail driven in was a promise that this family wouldn't end with betrayal. Mason worked beside me without complaint, his hands sure, his eyes set. When he looked up at me, sweat glistening on his brow, I saw more man than boy. At sunset, I grilled dinner out back just like I used to before Evelyn passed. The smell of charcoal and smoke filled the yard. Mason sat on the steps humming one of her old gospel tunes. It was off-key, but the sound hit something in me that felt like peace. As we ate, I asked, "You ever think about what you want to be when you grow up?" He wiped his mouth and thought for a moment. "A lawyer," he said. "Maybe one who helps people like us, people who got hurt by the ones they trusted." I smiled. "That's a good answer." "Or maybe a pastor," he added with a shrug. "Someone who knows what real faith costs." That one hit deeper. "You'd be good at either," I said. He nodded, chewing slowly, then said, "I just don't want this to happen to anyone else. I want to make sure people see the truth before it's too late." That was Evelyn's legacy, talking through him truth as salvation, not weapon. When the stars came out, we sat in silence again. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass, the world moving soft and slow around us. The anger I'd carried for so long began to fade, replaced by something quieter, cleaner. Grandpa Mason said suddenly, "Yeah, do you think God's still with us?" I looked up at the sky, black velvet scattered with light. "He never left, son. We just stopped listening." He nodded, and for a long time neither of us spoke. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of a church choir from somewhere down the street. Their voices rose and fell, weaving through the night like smoke. It sounded like hope. I thought about Craig again, my son lost and wandering. Maybe one day he'd hear that same music and remember where home was. Maybe not. Either way, I knew Mason and I would be here holding what was left of this family together. The clock struck 9, its soft chime echoing through the house. Mason stood stretching. "I'll finish that report for school," he said, smiling. "It's about integrity." I laughed quietly. "You've already lived the lesson, boy." He disappeared inside, leaving me on the porch. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the wood creak beneath me, the photo of Evelyn glowing faintly in the light from the living room. Sometimes God breaks what we build, I thought, to show what can be rebuilt. And as the night deepened, I felt it for the first time in a long while. Not anger, not grief, but something stronger. The quiet rise of faith, steady and alive, pulsing through the bones of the house like a heartbeat. But somewhere beyond that, peace far off in the distance, I heard a car engine roar to life. And I knew before the sound faded into the dark, the story wasn't finished yet. Life has a way of testing what we believe in most, our love, our patience, our faith. Sometimes the people we raise and trust are the very ones who break our hearts. But even in that pain, there's a lesson waiting to be seen. True strength isn't found in anger or revenge. It's found in holding your dignity when the world tries to take it. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing peace over poison. And when life shatters what you've built, it might just be God's way of showing what can still be rebuilt through faith in the next generation. The story reminds us that even when our children lose their way, the seeds of goodness we planted can still bloom in our grandchildren's hearts. Legacy isn't just about wealth or name, it's about the strength of character we leave behind. If this story touched something in your heart, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Have you ever faced a moment where faith was the only thing holding you together? Tell us your story and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales of family justice and redemption.